The significance of international solidarity for us is something that constitutes a principle for the Cuban Revolution. And to see that people from all over the world is in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution is something that really constitutes a commitment for us. We are committed to continue in solidarity with other peoples because Cuba has been the recipient of the World Solidarity Actions. And also it is a clear expression of a value that can unite people in different countries with different cultures, with different political beliefs, that for being human beings, it is necessary to be in solidarity. So it is the meaning it has for all of us. It is a huge support, and we believe that we are here thanks to many things, and especially thanks to the international solidarity. I will give my personal opinion because I'm not an expertise on those aspects. I'm an activist of international solidarity and the president of ICAP. And I can tell you that, first of all, that is a process that we are facing today as a result of our resistance, as a result of our firm position in our principles defending Cuba, the Cuban Revolution, our independence, our sovereignty, and our decision to build a socialist society. So, in coherence with that, I believe that the process is going to be a long process. And when we talk about rejoining diplomatic relations, it is quite different to say that the relations will be normal. So the normalization of the Cuba-US relations is something that we will see, but in a period, in a long-term period, in my understanding, because remember that ideologically speaking, we are not reconcilable. So we are different. We are not only since January the 1st, 1959, the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban nation as a project is totally in contradiction with the ideology of the United States and the founding fathers of the US system and the country of the United States. So if Cuba wants to be independent, there are going to be many threats coming from the US. If Cuba wants to continue being sovereignty and deciding on our internal domestic decisions, it is going to be something coming from the US, because ideologically speaking, they are designed to be the owners of Cuba. So it is a contradiction that I don't feel that is going to be solved in a short period of time. So another aspect of your question is what obstacles this process will have. I think that I already mentioned the ideological obstacles, but of course, you are interested in knowing the impact in the society, in the economy, in different terms, in time. Well, in terms of our economic situation, we believe that if the US President Barack Obama take into consideration his prerogatives, there are some levels of exchange in terms of economic exchange, in terms of the licenses that he is already approving in order to allow US citizens to come to Cuba, in order to allow some sectors of the Cuba and the people in the US to be in communication, that it will have a positive impact. Of course, remember that the main obstacle is the US blockade against Cuba. And that blockade is approved and codified by the US Congress. So Obama, he said that he's committed to engage the Congress in a serious debate about the blockade. So we hope he has success on that. Remember that another obstacle is that in a current composition of the US Congress, there is the Republican Party is the majority, in that legislative body, and it means that many of the Republicans are anti-Cubans. Of course, there are some bi-party agreements in terms of having a tactic interest in lifting the U.S. blockade against Cuba. For instance, let us mention the case of some enterprises and some businessmen willing to have a coalition against the blockade, because they belong to the lobby of the food industry in the United States, agricultural industry, and also people willing to sell their products in Cuba. And it is interesting, that tendency, and we know why they want to lift the blockade. They want to lift the blockade because the blockade is an obstacle for their business. So they need to make profit out of the lifting of the US blockade. And of course, we are expecting that to happen. But we are sure that another obstacle is that the US is clearly saying, and Barack Obama clearly said in many moments during these days that he has been doing many speeches about Cuba and the change in his policy on Cuba, that the objectives are the same. They changed the methods because the methods were a failure, the policy was a failure, but they say they have the same objectives. Which are the same objectives? Well, to defeat the Cuban Revolution. So it is another obstacle. The cynicism of the US policy on Cuba, because they are saying, well, we understand that our policy is a disaster, is a failure, but we need to continue looking for a way to achieve a regime change in Cuba. So it is absolutely unacceptable for us, because it is the Cuban people, it is our parliament, it is our civil society, it is our elected officials, the ones that are empowered to decide what will happen in Cuba. It is not any foreign power who will decide the destiny and the future of the Cuban Revolution. And in terms of the Cuban society, we understand that one of the things that immediately, together with the approval of the U.S. policy, the U.S. blockade policy against Cuba, together with that, they have been prohibiting the U.S. citizens to come to Cuba. And I advise you to wonder why. Why don't they want the U.S. citizens to come and see Cuba by themselves? So that's one of the benefits that I feel we will achieve from that, because, and still today we are witness of that. ICAP, our institute, is receiving thousands of people coming from the U.S., and you can see that the majority of those citizens realized how many lies they have been told during their lives. They come to Cuba, they see them by themselves, they talk to the Cuban people, and of course there is not a consensus that they are in favor of the Cuban socialism. No, it's not the situation, but they are now more able to understand what Cuba is. They are able to understand that yes, we have a society with a lot of achievements, that in Cuba you can walk down the streets and nobody's going to kill you, nobody's going to kidnap your kid, and so on. So it is a process where the Cuban society is going to be benefited in front of the eyes of the U.S. public opinion. I know that a huge wall of silence continues, because there are more articles in the U.S. media about Cuba, but still there are a lot of distortion. There is a lot of distortion regarding the Cuban reality. But nevertheless, it is very important to have people-to-people exchange. And what is happening today in these changes, we have obstacles, but remember that Obama recognized that the Cuban government is the entity with which they have to relate. They cannot relate with the civil society, what they call the independent civil society, or the private sector of Cuba, because the institution is established by the Cuban Revolution in power, and they have to recognize the empowerment of the Cuban Revolution and not any other alternatives or opposition that they build with mercenaries paying salaries for the people here to say what the U.S. intersection is expecting them to say. So there are some obstacles, and we are not falsely optimistic. We expect this process to continue, and we are doing our process with our principles. We are not going to do any concession in our principles, and I hope we will have results. And the U.S. people is in favor of that changes. The majority of the U.S. people is in favor of that, and I hope that the U.S. government, the present administration and the future administrations, take advantage of this moment for Cuba and also for Latin America. First of all, when you talk about Cuban socialism, you should remember these people that probably they are feeling that our socialism is about to end. They should remember that the Cuban socialism was proclaimed after the invasion in Playa Girón, the Bay of Pigs. So we triumphed, we defeated the mercenary invasion, and it was the moment where we realized that only socialism was the solution to preserve and to really build a different society and to really find the kind of political system that really fits in our needs as a people. So today, 54 years after that, I can tell you, well, let us see, is the confrontation between socialism and capitalism showing us that capitalism has won any battle? I don't think so. The battles that we are winning today are in the hands of socialism. And the struggles that we have achieved victories like the Cuban Five, for instance, it is thanks of the resistance of a people with different mentality. And that new and different mentality, the new human beings that Che Guevara said that we had to be able to prepare, it is socialist. So I don't think the Cuban socialism is coming to an end. I believe that yes, the Cuban socialism is facing a challenge. And in my belief, this challenge, the first result that we will have from that is to be stronger, is to realize that whenever we are in a victory, we cannot feel that everything is done. We have to realize that in every historical moment, when our historical enemies see that we are like in that feel of joy because we won a victory, they could take advantage of that momentum and to try to undermine the unity of the Cuban people, try to confuse our people through the cultural war. Remember that they are very strong in terms of the pseudo-cultural war that they present, consumerism and many other things. So the Cuban socialism now, with the updating of the Cuban socialist model that we approved in our previous Congress of the Communist Party of Cuba, more than 8 million Cubans having a debate, more than 3 million proposals on the table, 68% of the guidelines were changed in terms of the way we wanted those guidelines to be in order to have a better socialism. I don't feel it has to do with a weakness. It has to do with a strength. It has to do with the continuity of a socialism in a different moment in Latin America, in Cuba, 56 years after the triumph of the revolution, and very committed with the alternative of socialism. I'm very confident on the capability of the younger generation of Cubans to succeed in this new moment of the socialist building in Cuba. And I say that because if our previous generations that didn't see this momentum, they lived and they protagonized other moments of the Cuban Revolution. But the new generations, we have been able to enjoy the achievements, but also, and it is a very important aspect of our generations, to enjoy, yes, to enjoy the achievements, but at the same time remember that we have been the generation that have been facing the silent enemy, that have been facing an enemy that you cannot see clearly. It is the enemy that is present in the subversion programs, that enemy that is in the media, in the systematic campaign against Cuba, that enemy that is also taking advantage of our failures internally, that enemy that is saying, oh, you see Cuba, they are updating socialism because they committed many mistakes. And remember that it is the generation that in the middle of that confusion have been very lucky to have together with us the historical generation of the revolution. Fidel, Raúl, Almeida, Vilma, Celia, all these women. So it is not a problem of being older than 40 years or younger. The problem in the younger generations of Cuba, or not the problem, the case of the Cuban younger generations, it is that yes, we belong to different moments, but we are committed with the same principles. And of course, that is true, that we have to understand the new moments, a different epoch, where the new technologies of information and communication are so prevalent in our everyday lives. Of course, it is a new moment. Our previous generations don't even have a telephone or a paper to write, and today it is a different dynamic in the society. But again, I believe that this new generation are able, because they inherited all these values, and at the same time they have been able to be creative, facing the new challenges and playing our role in this new scenario. And we could see that few days ago in Panama, in the summit, in the Civil Society Forum, as part of the organization of the American States Summits, where Cuban young members of the Cuban delegation, members of the University Student Federation, members of the Cuban civil society, they were able face to face with the counter-revolutionaries, face to face with the mercenaries, with the murderer of Che Guevara, to tell those people in front of them, eye to them, to say, you are not representing me, you are not representing the Cuban society, we are the genuine representatives of the Cuban Revolution. So when you are able to do that with that genuinity in your expression, it is because you are decided to defend a revolution. And of course, we have many challenges in front of us. Those challenges has to do that, of course, there are new ways to do the war against Cuba. I mentioned them, the subversion programs. All this natural need of persons living in an island like Cuba is, to exchange our views with other people in the world. That decision that we have made as part of the updating process of the Cuban socialism to open up our country in terms of the migratory policy. So our young people in Cuba is traveling abroad more often than the previous generations. And in my understanding, and I have been able to talk to some of the Cuban young people traveling around, it is going to make us stronger, because that will allow us to compare. And when they are going to many countries, not only the United States, but to Ecuador, to Europe, to many other countries, when they return, I can tell you that they see, well, that's true that there are many things, a lot of things that we don't have in Cuba. But what you feel in Cuba, that you have a country, that you have your identity, that nobody will discriminate you because of the color of your skin, or because you are gay, or because of all these things that in the world are so common that you are discriminated in many other countries. And that's where the revolution thrives. That's where our values will succeed in these challenges that we have for the present and for the future of the Cuban Revolution. The British public is not homogeneous. The British public is very diverse. I have been to Britain several times. I will never forget one of those visits organized by Rock Around the Blockade, and a very amazing, unforgettable speaking tour that I was able to do when I was in the Cuban youth and students movement. And I can tell you that for the general public of the Great Britain, that is such an imperialist power, I will call their consciousness to be more solidarious, to really understand that for a person in the United Kingdom to have the current pattern of consumerism, there is hundreds, probably thousands of people that is dying by hunger. For the general public of the United Kingdom to tell them that it is necessary to change that selfishness. It is necessary to start by each of them. Not only thinking that it is going to be someone that will change. No, it is necessary to start changing by each of the citizens living in the United Kingdom, because each of these changes will make the change. And in terms of the revolutionary people, the progressive people in the United Kingdom, I thank them a lot, because you have been very active defending the Cuban Revolution. You have been very active joining our campaign to free the Cuban Five. When we achieved that victory, we talked a lot about you, people that no matter if it is in Scotland or in London or wherever, if it is snowing or not, but you went to many places in front of the Big Ben or in many places in the United Kingdom defending Cuba with a poster of the Cuban Five, or probably with a banner against Bacardi, or with the Cuban flags going to demonstrations and in favor of Palestine, in favor of Venezuela, supporting the Latin American and Caribbean integration, keeping Che Guevara's ideas with you like you do in Rock Around the Blockade, just promoting solidarity with Cuba against capitalism and defending Cuban socialism. And I thank you for that. It is my main message. And of course, I have to ask you something. Keep going. Don't give up, because it is necessary to know that even in a very wealthy country like the United Kingdom, we have people like you that is not benefited from that wealth, that is in certain way is excluded from that wealth, is discriminated and has not the same access to that wealth. And you have the right to be benefited from that, but the benefit, well, I feel that we should express our solidarity with you, the people in the United Kingdom that is having progressive ideas, that is defending your right to be citizens of a country that is very rich, that is wealthy. And I know that many of you are excluded from that wealth, and the way that wealth is distributed is very unfair. And keep going. It is necessary to keep going, demonstrating that the immigrants living in the United Kingdom, the people that has been born in the United Kingdom, has the same right to be representative in the national parliament, in the local authorities, in all the communities. You have the right to housing, you have the right to be mothers and fathers of children with quality in their education, with quality in the healthcare. Why not? You have a lot of resources. Keep fighting for that. You have the right to achieve that, because if Cuba is able to do that with just few resources, why aren't you able to achieve that? I believe it is time to think definitely that the world has to change. Capitalism is not the way to achieve that. It is a socialist society, the one that will allow us all to live together like human beings. And it is my message to you. Thank you so much. You are very courageous. Keep going and don't give up in your struggle.